We looked at the way the operations in the sector was being handled, and we felt that it was inefficient and we could be a lot more efficient. There are three ways you can create value. You can create value by creating new products to displace the existing product, which is component innovation.
All right. Wow, talking about the Pinnacle Oil and Gas, I remember a few weeks ago, before the unveiling of your manifesto at Okoye University, the president officially inaugurated and opened that Pinnacle Oil and Gas. Yes. And is adjudged as one of the biggest and highest projects, if not in Nigeria, but also in Africa. And you are the brain behind that project. What was the inspiration behind it?
So the Pinnacle Oil and Gas story is an interesting one, because don't forget that Pinnacle Oil and Gas, we only started operation in 2008. Okay. So by all standards, we're late entrants into the oil and gas downstream space. The downstream space is a mature industry. It's an industry that has existed several years, over 100 years. And it means that in a space like that, you already have incumbents. So if you look at the life cycle of an industry or life cycle of a market, there are different stages of that market. You have the era of ferment. So if you have a market that is evolving, a nascent market, you see people playing in that space. A lot of people will be competing for space. They'll be competing for market shares. Because it's a new area, there hasn't been a dominant product, there hasn't been a dominant design. So people will be competing to see how much shares they can take in that market space. So the next in the circle, in that life cycle of a market, is where you now have, the market gets to a stage of incremental design. So from era of ferment, you get to dominant design, you get to era of incremental design. That era of incremental design, what you see is that a dominant product has emerged. I'll give you an example. When we used to have the video cassette recording, yes. You know that a VHS and Betamax were competing when that market was evolving. But ultimately, VHS became the dominant design. Okay, so VHS now took over that space. So those that were producing VHS became the dominant players in that space. And ultimately, that market became mature. And once the market becomes mature, what you notice is incremental growth, So that was where the downstream was. Okay. We were at that incremental growth. And sometimes in a market cycle too, once you've achieved incremental growth, you now get to the era of discontinuity. Something comes, disrupts that space, and that whole market becomes discontinued. Just like in the issue of VCR. You no longer have VCR today. Disc came and displaced and dislodged VCR. So we had the era. So you can argue that in the case of the VCR, we've gone up to the era of the discontinuity. So that product design is gone. Disc also, you know the story of disc. Of course, you know the story of Blockbuster and Netflix. How the Blockbuster was largely the dominant player, the incumbent in that space, until Netflix came, displaced them. So the issue of rental of video, of disc and all that, was displaced by live streaming of these things. So today we have Netflix displacing Blockbuster and taking leadership position of that space. So the reason I gave that background is because market, or indeed industries, you have what is known as life cycle. So we came into the downstream sector at a point where the market was mature.
Okay.
The incumbents had already
Yes.
taken position. So in order for you to say you're coming into a mature space and you want to play a leadership role, because that was our vision from day one. We stated clearly that we want to play a leadership role. So from day one when we set up, so you'll be asking yourself, how would you be coming into a mature space that the shares of the market had already been taken by the incumbent, and yet you want to play a leadership role? The only way you could do that is to disrupt the status quo, just like Netflix did with Blockbuster, just like Uber did with the city taxis, okay? And just like digital camera did
Yes.
with the Kodak, what used to be those, you know what we
Yes,
used to,
yes.
how we processed film
yeah.
those days. And once the digital photography came, it displaced that. So the only way you can become a leader in a mature space is through innovation. To create something that would add more, that would be of more value to the people using a particular product, and then capture that value. So creating value is one thing, capturing it is another thing. So we used to have radio, and somebody came up with the idea of television. But I'll tell you, the guy who invented TV was not the one who eventually captured the value.
Okay.
So he created a value, but he didn't know, for all the way they referred to TV those days was a visual radio, a radio that you can see something from. But it took businessmen who now understand other things you can use TV for, advert and what have you, so they created value. So innovation sometimes, and I'd like you to distinguish invention from innovation. Okay. I'm sure, I hope I'm not giving you lecture business, not spending time on this, but yes, you know, you can be inventive, you can have creative mind to invent something, and that may be of value, but you may not necessarily be the one to capture that value if you haven't also think about how to frame the value of what you have created in order for you to capture it. A good example I usually cite is the guy who invented the drone that we use today. Initially, when the drone was invented, even the retailers didn't know where to place it in the shelves. So if you went to the shelves, they wanted to put it in the toy, where they put toys, because they felt that that was what it was. You know, it was just something that hobbyists use, you know, to play around. So the parrot drone, who was largely the guys who created that, didn't quite capture the value. The guy who came and captured the value was a Chinese company, I've forgotten the name. They came now and decided that, look, beyond just using this as a toy to play with, that you can actually use it for photography, you can use it for video. So they eventually captured. So the point I'm making is that, of course, you can be inventive, you can be creative. So the business model is also very critical. So there are three ways you can create value. You can create value by creating new products to displace the existing product, which is component innovation. The other way you can create value is through the operating process. You can come into a space where the operation is suboptimal. You know, the operation part of things, the logistics part of things is suboptimal. And you decide, oh, there are ways we can either disrupt the multiple handling, there are ways we can do things so that we can be more efficient in our operation space. And then the other way is through your business model. So you can look at, so people had, if you look at Uber, what did Uber do? Uber did innovation by disrupting a business model. So what happened was, in order for you to be able to play in the taxi space. You have to own a car, and then you go move around to pick people. So they said, no, we can actually create a platform where we can bring in people who own cars and people who need a ride to participate in that platform, and we'll capture the value. And so they just created a platform, that is two-sided. You have the providers of service participating in that platform, and then you have the users of that service. So they didn't have to own any vehicle. All they owned was platform. And so that's a business model innovation. The same thing with Airbnb. Airbnb today has tens of millions of rooms worldwide, and yet they don't own any brick and mortar. But they have more rooms than even Marriott, that owns all this brick and mortar. They've built hotels, bought buildings, incurring cost on that. You have Hilton, you have Marriott, and the rest of them, those big names. But they are not as big as Airbnb. Airbnb, without owning any brick and mortar, they yet have more rooms than these big names. What did they do? Business model innovation. They basically created a platform where those who own brick and mortar participated or participate in, and those who need the services of the owners of brick and mortar also participate in the same, platform. So that's business model innovation. So I think I give this background so you understand that we knew when we came into the industry that in order for us to play a leadership role, we would have to disrupt the status quo. We had to do something creative that people were not used to. So, and that was essentially what we did. So when we got into Pinnacle, we recognized that because what we did was largely commodity, you sell oil and gas. Oil products, you cannot be so creative or innovative in terms of the product type, because it is what it is. There is a standard specification coming from the refinery, and you're not playing in the refining space. You're playing in the marketing and in the trading space. So there wasn't so much innovation to do there. In terms of pricing too, there wasn't so much radical innovation to do there, because the pricing is largely known by everybody. But we saw some compelling business problem in the operation space. And we felt, look, we can disrupt here. We can be creative in this operation space. So we looked at the way the operations in the sector was being handled, and we felt that it was inefficient and we could be a lot more efficient and optimal. So we came and disrupted that sector by disrupting the multiple handlings. So what would ordinarily have taken the industry 32 days to do, we reduced it to just 2 days. From 32 days to 2 days. So the vessels that's called to our facility today are vessels that ordinarily will sit in the high sea, and you will have smaller vessels going there to pick from them. So you're incurring costs for keeping the mother vessel, what we refer to as mother vessel. And then you're also incurring costs hiring the shuttle vessels. So it's multiple handling and cost intensive, and in terms of time, it takes forever. The downtime takes 32 days, as I said. So the same vessel we can berth at our facility and discharge within 48 hours, the vessel is gone. So we're saving the industry huge cost, but we're also capturing the value because we're also traders, and we're also, in the downstream sector, we're today #1 because in terms of volume, the sheer volume we can do, and in terms of revenue, we're #1.